Okay, first of all, thank you everybody for joining us. This presentation is being given by Yehudit, Lindblom, and Joe Gelb. We're both with Suite Solutions. Yehudit Lindblom is one of our project managers, and I like to call her one of our expert cat herders. And I think as we go through the presentation, I think you'll understand a little bit more. These projects, are detailed, and there's a lot of moving parts. And Yehudit's one of our star performers here at Suite Solutions in running these projects, and I'm very happy to have her with us. My name is Joe Gelb. I'm founder and president of Suite Solutions. Suite Solutions is primarily a service company. We enable you to engage your customers by providing quick access to relevant information. And as we talk more in the details, and we talk about DITA, and we talk about style sheets and all the nitty-gritty that goes along with it, really it's very important to keep in mind that really at the end of the day, what we really care about is getting to our customers, getting them more effective information, and being more efficient about it. So we're going to be talking about a lot of details, but it's always very important to keep your vision, our vision, and what we're trying to achieve in focus. We'd like to say that we help companies get it right the first time. We do a lot of XML-based or DITA-based authoring and publishing solutions, not just DITA, but other standards as well. We have our own platforms, primarily SuiteShare, social knowledge base, and consultancy, application development, system integration. And pretty much everything we're going to be talking about with you today is coming from experience, our own experience working with real live customers over the past 7 or 8 years as Suite Solutions. So the main topics of this webinar are as follows. First, we're going to talk about the goals. We'll talk about the key components of a DITA solution, and then we'll talk about the high-level steps, which will take us through the vast majority of the presentation. Okay, the primary goal of this webinar is to empower you and not to overwhelm you. You're going to see we're going to go through a lot of detailed processes and dependencies and a lot of nitty-gritty, but I really feel that that empowering you by letting you know the details and letting you know what's really involved and letting you know what some of the possible pitfalls are, things to be aware of, I think that's really empowering. Someone who's walking into a DITA implementation or any large project, it's good to get educated, and you're not going to know everything, you're not going to remember everything all the time, but going into it, it's good to have your eyes open and to have someone behind you that can help you with the way and help you along the way and let you know what's coming up. The primary goal is to build a solid plan based on experience. Schedule accordingly the project, understand the skills required and the help that you need to seek. And there's a lot of skills that you're going to need to know about, and we'll talk about those skills and the type of help you can get. We're going to be talking a lot about managing expectations. A lot of this is going to be talking about things that you should do and things that you should not do. I don't know if you guys remember the famous Bernstein Bears book about the bike lesson. It's one of my favorites. It's Papa Bear goes and he's teaching Brother. Well, at that point he doesn't have a sister yet, but I guess he's still called Brother. But anyway, he teaches Brother how to ride a bike, and each time he tries to teach Brother a lesson, he winds up being not so effective in carrying out that part of the lesson. And it turns out from this is what you should do to this is what you should not do. And it comes from experience. After Papa's experience of trying to ride a bike, Brother Bear knows exactly how to ride a bike, not only from what Papa says to do, but also from what Papa shows him not to do. So we're going to go through a lot of both of that during the presentation. So DITA, we like to say DITA is like building a house. Okay? So what do you need to build a house? So if we use this as a allegory to doing a DITA project. So first of all, you need to get educated about houses. Okay, then you need to get an architect or designer to design according to your need, your requirements for your house, and your budget. If you have a medium-sized budget, so you might not be able to afford to build a mansion, so therefore you should not design a mansion. If you have enough money for a mansion, then go ahead and design one. But you need to know what your budget is and what your real requirements are, and then design accordingly. A good architect will help you with that. An engineer is there to make sure it's built right, with the right materials, on stable foundations with the ability to expand. And we'll see that with implementations like DITA, where you're really building a foundation for a new foundation for your documentation processes, your documentation production line. So it's not all done at once, and you need to be building something that's stable and that can be built upon. It's not going to crack under pressure. A contractor goes and helps you manage the project. He or she brings in the right resources at the right time to get the construction done according to the specs, according to the requirements. I don't know, I've watched some or had friends who've built houses, and sometimes you have contractors who bring the people right in at the right time, one after the other. And some contractors aren't so good. They bring in workers before they need to, or the workers come way after their task really needs to be starting, and delays the project. So a good contractor knows when to bring the right resources in at the right time. And then you need actually workers, developers, to actually build with good quality according to those plans.
So one of the things to just be careful with when you're doing your house building is that all of us want to do things on our own, and we think, oh yeah, I've learned about that and I've read about it and I've watched enough do-it-yourself television shows on the Learning Channel. I can do this myself. But when you look at the picture that we have on the slide here, it sort of looks like if you think that you can do everything on your own, the chances are that it's going to be very difficult to do that. And if you've got the right team and you've got the right experience and the right knowledge, then you're going to be much more successful about it. So you're going to need some help to fill in the gaps where you don't have the information, and use the experience from people who have done it. And again, it's not always easy. There's going to be pain points here and there, but in the end, you're going to have an amazing house that you're going to love to live in.
So some of the key components of a DITA solution on a very high level: you need staff, right? You need to train your staff and have good people. You need content. You need to get your content into XML. You need to deal with translation, or some people are doing translation. I would say most of our customers are doing translation, or at least thinking about it in the future, near future. That often, by the way, in parentheses, that often becomes a significant component of an ROI for a DITA solution. There's publishing, getting your content published into the right outputs, and then there's content and configuration management, managing your content and doing configuration management of your revisions of your documents, of your publications. And your mission is to develop or acquire each of these. Okay, some of these you might have in-house already. You might have good staff. You might have experienced staff who've maybe done some of these implementations already. That's if so, you're in really good shape. You might have people who know how to do content conversion. Maybe you want to develop or maybe you want to acquire that skill and send it out. But basically, each of these things you need to develop that expertise or acquire that expertise. So the high-level steps, and here will really kind of bring us through the rest of the presentation, are as follows. The first thing you need to do is assemble your project team. And we'll talk about that in detail. You need to get some training. You need a good solution architecture, deciding generally solution architecture really goes around the tool set, which tools you're going to be using, how they're going to be put together, what the process is going to be. You need a good information architecture. That means how you're going to be organizing your content, tagging up your content, using metadata, etc. You need to convert that content to XML based on your information architecture and based on your solution architecture. Okay, and the training that you've gotten in the beginning will help you to do all of these things. You'll need some style sheet development, which again comes from your experience as your information architecture and is informed by your solution, the content conversion XML that you'll use for testing style sheets. You'll need to do configuration of your content management tools. Some companies did at least in the beginning with a file system. Generally, I think that's a short-term solution. The vast majority of folks wind up purchasing some kind of content management or CCM, component content management tool. Then it's basically wrapping up everything: your conversion, your content, style sheets, configurations, deploying, and then going into a production mode where where you're working and you're getting support as needed. So the first step is to assemble your project team. Okay, the project team needs to include a few different types of people. One of the main things which a lot of people tend to forget is to make sure that your main project stakeholders are somehow on your project team. Could be that they're not going to take part in every single meeting, but it's always good to keep your stakeholders, people who are your managers or your high-level managers or the people who are funding your project, other people in your company who are looking and with interest at what you're doing and might want to join in later. We're going to keep people informed and making sure you're building consensus and buy-in from other people in the company. We've had unfortunately experiences where where groups will get up and running, and then all of a sudden all kinds of nasty politics gets in and just puts a big monkey wrench into things, and that's because someone got their wings ruffled, they weren't invited to the meetings, or they weren't included, and so often all you need to do is have someone be able to give their opinion, especially people who hold the purse strings, and make sure everyone's involved, at least on a high level. You need a writer, at least one or two writers on your project team. The writer should be familiar with their content. Okay, writers are important. The writers are going to be the people who are going to be mostly using your system, authoring the content, and that's the content in this case is really your product. You want to have the writers involved. Now, it's often good to have a writer on the team who's open to learning new methods and tools. Okay, and that's not necessarily the most senior and entrenched person in the group. Sometimes the most senior people in the group are raring to go. They know all the pain points, and they really are eager to learn the new tools and get up and running and be a prime mover in this process. And sometimes, unfortunately, the people who are not so excited about moving to something new. You really have to be careful about who's on your team. You want people who are going to be optimistic, people who are raring to go, and people who are going to work with you, who are going to sweat a little bit and roll up their sleeves and really work with you to get a good solution and make their time available. You'll need a good information architect. Now, sometimes the writer and the information architect can be the same person if you have a small team. But generally, an information architect is someone on your team who has a good understanding of the main body of your content and how it's being used, or maybe how it should be used. Okay. Often, an information architect consultant will be very helpful in training up your information architect internally and your writers to have a good look at your content. We'll talk about that later on, content audit, and help you to come up to the tag and policies and the content models that you're going to be using to carry forward. It's generally good not to just rely on a consultant. You're going to want to have this experience in-house. So it's really good to get some training and really have someone who's labeled as information architect right from the beginning. You also want someone who's what we call a technical guru, someone who's on the team who can understand the tool set, understand the customizations and how everything's stitched together. Now, it could be the same person as a writer. It could be the information architect. It could be someone from your IT staff. It could be, it could be anybody. Someone who used to be running running the publications using the old system. But it's good to have someone on the team who kind of can see how everything fits together. And later on, when something needs to be tweaked or adjusted, or maybe something breaks, someone who can work well with the vendors, talk their language, use the same vocabulary, and someone who also works well with your ID department, the people who are going to be very likely hosting your environment, and helping to explain them what's going to be happening, the procedure, the process, and basically getting IT people on board. You also want to have, in the vast majority of cases, an external project manager. An external project manager is someone that you hire or contract with who helps you build a comprehensive project plan. We'll talk a little bit later about what a project plan might look like, but it's got a lot of details, a lot of dependencies, and you really want to have someone with experience. A project manager will help you coordinate with your external resources. If you've hired an IA, an information architect consultant, who can interface with the software vendors for you and intercede on your behalf, who can work with the conversion experts, with the style sheet developers, and everybody who's working. And you'll see with the project plan, often these things are happening in parallel. There's a lot of dependencies, and you want to kind of keep the more people work together, and one thing moves into the other and doesn't get stuck because of one detail or the other. The better the project manager, and the more experience they have, then the shorter your cycle will be of getting into production. Okay? And the most important thing I'm going to reiterate is that it brings experience to your team.
So it's really important to allow enough time for each step. You'll see as we're going through, we have several reality checks, and this is where we come in with a little bit of practical, experience-based advice. So one of the things we want to make sure is that when you are starting your project, that you really do understand that it's going to take a little time to get through this whole thing, and you want to make sure you gather the right materials, that you have the right material available for conversion, as we'll talk about later. You get your testing and everything done, that you have time for it. You have to budget in time on your side to test what is given to you for review by the team doing the work for you. And making sure that the prerequisites are ready. Again, you want to work very closely with whoever's doing the work for you to make sure that you have all of the prerequisites set up. If you know for a fact that you need certain content converted in a certain way, or you know what your style sheet requirements, your style sheet is like your template, what your template requirements are going to look like, things like that. In terms of making sure when your internal resources will be available, so again, you want to be able to set up a plan with your conversion team and with your style sheet team, to say, and your training team, and say, okay, my resources are going to be available for training on X date, and we're going to have regular meetings, and we know that we're going to be able to, we're going to get a delivery on a certain date, and that date is not going to conflict with something we've got going on internally for our own jobs that we have to keep doing. So we want to make sure that you have time to test and retest before you ever approve anything. If you were to take shortcuts going through the process, if you don't test it properly, if you think, oh, they did a good job, I'm not going to bother reviewing it, it could cause problems later on. So you want to make sure that you, on your side, take the time to do everything the right way the first time.
And now we're going to talk a little bit about training. So the first thing to do towards the beginning of your project is to do some quick start training, and that's really getting your project team up and running with what DITA is, and preparing them to make the nitty-gritty detailed decisions about the requirements, about priorities, and about preferences. So the initial training goals really are to get a good understanding of the process, the vocabulary, what DITA is, how to you know, what the different terms are, the information architecture and elements and custom specializations and style sheets and all this other stuff. It's very important to get some hands-on experience. You want to kind of, you know, try to imagine yourself living in that house that you're building, and that helps you to set expectations about what you're going to need to start doing, things you're going to have to start worrying about or being concerned about, and basically just get prepared for the experience that's going to be coming up, and the details you're going to have to make decisions on. You know, if you kind of look around your house and see all the things on your walls and the doors and the windowsills and the doorknobs and all the things that, you know, when you buy a house or you go into a new apartment and you kind of spend time trying to furnish your house, there's lots of details, and it's kind of similar here. You kind of have to understand get yourself prepared what's going to be coming up, and that's what the quick start training is for. So really the best practice is getting some hands-on training with exercises and real familiar content. When we do training, we often prepare ourselves with real content that our customers are using, you know, their unstructured content, and we go through exercises of, okay, let's figure out what this content is, how do we break it up, what kind of topics are these, how do we tag, let's practice tagging them up, let's practice making maps, let's practice actually publishing them. So, you know, going through the process on real life familiar content, not just some basic demo material, is very important. Seems to be a little delay in the slide.
What often
Go ahead.
What often ends up happening is that you have to have a certain amount of knowledge to begin a project. So you have to go through the basic initial training. then what happens is you go through the conversion, you go through your style sheet development, you go through your content management system, and then it comes time to actually start working in it, and suddenly you can't remember a lot of the stuff that you learned originally, could be weeks or months previously. So it's always a good idea to make sure that you set up a second training session, and the second training session will include everyone who's going to be writing on it, as opposed to the people who were just originally working on the content conversion or style sheet requirements. So it's important to make sure that that is in your schedule and in your budget for a second set of training. And like Joe said, it's really important to have training based on content that you're really familiar with. I've been through a system in another company where we had a training where it was based on, okay, you have to just do this and make it up. And that's great. It was definitely some experience for us, but there's no substitute for working with content with which you're already familiar.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about solution architecture. So the key considerations of a solution architecture are scope, schedule, and budget. And I think Yehudit will agree with me. That's kind of a mantra around here. Is getting everybody. Yeah. This is why one of the reasons why we call Yehudit the most successful cat herder in town over here, and that's really kind of helping people to get that scope together, making sure that people are getting customers are making a schedule that can be kept, and keeping to a budget that's reasonable. So the scope means what are your key requirements and what are your key goals. Okay, the main question is what are your business goals? What are your goals? What are your stakeholders' goals? And what's your company goals? It's important to kind of get that up in front. And it could be that the stakeholder goals are not the same as yours. And it could be that your goals are to make your life easier, meaning I've got 3 billion products that I need to document, and I'm using conditional text all over the place, and it's getting unwieldy, and I want DITA. And your stakeholders don't care about conditional text; they just care about driving down their translation costs. Okay, and that often might be the trigger to getting yourself a budget. So you have to always kind of keep in mind what all the goals are, what the business goals are. And that needs to be kept in mind when you're dealing with your scope and your requirements. What types of content are you going to be authoring in? Is it tech doc training or deck doc content, or maybe training later on support? What's going to be going on later on down the line? Who's reading your content? What are their goals? And that will inform the type of outputs that you're going to be developing. What are the pain points that you have that need resolution? Now, it could be that you set up this whole project to solve certain problems, or drive down translation costs, or get better reuse, or whatever have you, and then down towards the line you find out, wait a minute, there's other issues that we had that we weren't addressing, and it would be a big shame that we didn't take those into account. So you always want to kind of think about what the main pain points are. They need to be resolved, and make sure those are worked into your scope. Now you want to answer these questions for now, and try to imagine what's going to happen over the next few years. Okay, try to imagine other people around you, other teams that might be coming on. You don't want to be, you don't want to get stuck by endless conversations by everyone in the company, but you want to kind of keep an eye on what the possibilities of using the system are going to be later on. Okay, so for example, if you're in a larger organization and you can foresee training people coming on, training content and support content, etc., you're not going to want to pick a CMS that's not going to be enterprise, not going to be able to scale on an enterprise level. On the other hand, you don't want to spend a lot of money on a CMS that's only going to be used for a small group in the beginning. So you have to kind of keep these things in account. You want to schedule for a phased implementation. Generally, these implementations don't happen all at once. Okay, you want to schedule that it's going to kind of happen over time. Content's going to go in over time. Different style sheets might be developed over time for different outputs. Okay, you want to design for a phased implementation, design that right into the schedule. Your budget needs to be worked around your business case. A lot of people talk about and have whole presentations about helping you to build a business case around the potential savings and the value add. And we're not going to talk about this much now. We're not going to talk about that now, but it's something to keep in mind about building that budget. Some kind of regional budget based on your organization. What you know about what's happening in your company, what's reasonable to request, and to implement in stages, meaning if you have a budget, initial budget to get partway, what are you going to need next year or 6 months down the road or more to get additional publications in, converted, and style sheets up and running. And then to maintain the system. Generally there's maintenance, there's tweaking, there's always a little bit of extra training, you have new people coming in, so it's something you want to keep in mind over time when you're putting together your budget. So we're going to talk a little bit about information architecture. Information architecture, again, there's the whole presentations and training courses, but in general, information architecture really means a couple of things. It means doing a content audit, meaning reviewing your existing content, identifying the different structures you have in there, how your content's being used, what we call use case scenarios, figure out where something called specialization can be beneficial, and that's really, specialization is really, in a nutshell, allowing yourself to kind of customize the DITA DTDs or the DITA rule sheets in a way that could be beneficial to how you're using your content. Specialization can mean either making the content tagging easier or a little bit more complex. So that's something you want to take a look at in the content audit, and a good information architect consultant can help you with that. And again, and to identify reuse opportunities and how the reuse is going to happen. And based on that content audit, you go ahead and build what's called a content model. You'll talk about and you'll decide which topic types to use and in which situations. You might go ahead and build out the specializations. And generally, in parentheses, I'd like to mention that in general you want to kind of keep your specializations to a minimum unless you really have a real need for them. But that's again something depending on each company and what their needs are. You want to develop a strategy for organizing your maps, which really represent your publications, the relationships between content, the linking, the reuse. You're going to want to build a metadata model or a subject scheme model which deals with taxonomies and classifying your content to be filtered and using knowledge-based systems later on. Metadata becomes very important, not just for accessibility and searchability of the content, but metadata is also very important for when it comes to style sheet development. What's going to be appearing on the page if you're talking about a PDF, on the cover page, all kinds of information that's on the document that needs to be populated in your DITA files using metadata. So metadata has a big impact on your publications as well as how your CMS and your tools are going to be configured. And you're going to want to go and build templates for new topics and publications. So as your authors get up and running and are building new content, creating new content, you're going to want to make it as easy as possible for them using the right tagging and the right content model. And that will help you not only to make the authoring process easier for new people and your new authors, but also make your maintenance of your style sheets a lot more efficient. If people are using a very consistent content model, or people are being easily enforcing that model by making things easy, using templates and by customizing the authoring interfaces, then that can really drive down costs and headache when you go online with your style sheets. So information architecture is very important.
One of the things you really want to be aware of is that it's not the kind of situation where you set it all up and then you think, okay, we have it running, we can publish content, it looks how we want it to look, and now we're done. Because what often happens, or more often than not happens, is that sometime down the road, either you decide that you need a new kind of output, maybe you want to put your release notes into DITA, which you didn't have before, or you decide we're going to do a different kind of HTML output, something like that. You're going to keep going with that. Or even you want to set up a table differently than you had set up before. So you're going to have situations where things are going to change throughout time. It's not a one-time and you're done. It's definitely a process. And as you start migrating your content, let's say you have generally 15 books or documents that you're used to doing, or help sets that you're used to running. As you start converting them, you realize, hey, this isn't exactly working how it worked in the first 3 documents, so you need to speak with your IA specialist and figure out how you can fix that, and speak with your conversion specialist and figure out how you can fix that so that it continues to evolve in the direction you need it to go.
Thanks, Yehudit. Okay, we're going to talk about content conversion to XML. Now we're kind of getting into even more details. because the conversion, and we'll talk about later the style sheets, all these are really going to be building on your information architecture and the tools that you're going to be choosing. So the content conversion to XML basically means taking your existing content, whether you're using FrameMaker or Word or HTML or InDesign or whatever you've got, and converting that content into XML, into DITA XML. Now that content has to be converted into the DITA and the tagging that you've decided to use based on your information architecture. Okay, and that really involves developing mapping rules between your current unstructured documents, your content, and the new content model. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is formulate specs for migrating that content, the elements such as index, conditionalization, variables, metadata, all kinds of stuff that's inside the documents in addition to the content itself. All that's going to be taken into consideration in the specifications and the mapping to say, okay, here's my content, and this is what I want it to look like in the XML. Now, the content conversion is really a good opportunity to take part in basically take advantage of the content audit and say, okay, how are we going to maximize the amount of information we can get into our data based on what we already have into our unstructured content, and minimize as much as possible the work we're going to have to do to get the content ready for conversion and fix it up afterwards. Okay, the conversion process is not easy, and what you want to do is do a lot of thinking up front, and if you choose a good conversion vendor, they can usually build in a lot of smarts into the conversion. So in addition to the specs, you want to prepare what's called a pre-conversion checklist and a post-conversion checklist. Often the work that needs to get done to put that content into the proper structure, okay, some of that work is easier to do before the conversion using the tools that you're already familiar with, whether it be FrameMaker or whatever, and some of that work is easier to do after the conversion. Okay, so you're going to want to look at that and consult with your information architect and the people doing the conversion, and try to figure out what's the best way to split up the work, and really write that down in checklists. Because later on, a couple weeks or a couple months down the line, when someone's going to be actually getting the content ready or fixing it up, it's very useful to have those checklists of things to go through, to check and to fix. You're going to want to coordinate with the style sheet developers. Okay, meaning the style sheet developers are now producing templates or customizations that's going to take your content that you're converting now and make it look proper in the right formats. Okay, so your style sheet developers really need to be coordinated about what the content is that's going to be going through, all the different nitty-gritty of the tags, all the details, all the different behaviors that need to happen. And it's usually like a feedback loop that happens. The style sheet developers will be looking at things. Well, in order to get this behavior or in order to get this certain format, it'll be useful to distinguish the content in a certain way inside the DITA, either using semantic tags or things called output classes. And you're going to want to make sure that the style sheet developers have a good line of communication with the information architect and the conversion people. So this is happening. These conversations are happening during the work and not when everything is done. Okay, so you don't have to go back and reconfigure things or rework the content. You want to review the conversion spreadsheets, meaning once you get the tools up and running and the conversion starts happening, generally what happens in these conversions, in our experience anyway, is that the first thing to do is you take your content and run it through the first part of the conversion, and you'll get a list of all the headings inside your document. And you'll say, okay, here's all my headings. How do I want to split up these into topics? I want to maybe take that opportunity to change titles or input some metadata or indexes or something in a way, in some kind of a spreadsheet format, which is usually generally easy to work with. And again, use that conversion process as a way to minimize your work later on and get the content into as good shape as possible. Some people kind of ask us and say, well, why should I do a content conversion? I can just retype the content myself, or I need to rework the content. Maybe I'll just do it on my own. So that sounds like a good idea sometimes, but when you think about it, the two things really need to be concerned with. Number one is that no matter what you do, an automated conversion is going to be a lot quicker, and typing and rekeying content is difficult, especially when we're talking about things like tables, which are are very difficult to convert into DITA by hand, but the conversion tools do pretty quickly. The second thing to think about is that the content that you convert is going to be the benchmark or the beginning foundation for what your content is going to be looking like in DITA. If you're starting off with content in your CMS system that's coded by people who are just beginners, okay, and everyone's a beginner at some point. There's nothing wrong with being a beginner, but you want your content to be in good shape, a good foundation from the get-go, because that's the content that people are going to be looking at as examples that you're going to be using for testing in your style sheets and testing in your CMS, what your stakeholders are going to be looking at when they want to see how your project's doing, okay, and it's going to be used as the starting point for a lot of your new content. So it's very, very important to get your beginning content right, and generally doing conversion with people who know what they're doing, or can help you through the process is very valuable.
So almost whatever you do, and we've had one customer that I'm aware of that they had such strict rules within their company about how everything had to be written and that it had to follow the styles exactly. And their conversion was pretty simple and straightforward and didn't require a whole lot of work. The vast majority of companies, it's going to need a little work. You need to spend some time putting into the proper structure, making sure that everything is styled properly. And the amount of time that you spend doing it before the conversion is going to be paid off in the lack of time that you spend afterward. You're going to have to do some fixing at one point or another, and generally it's much easier, much less painful to do it beforehand than after. And it's always worth it. That I can guarantee that it's absolutely worth it based on my own experience. When you're going to send through something for conversion, the first thing that you send through, some companies have chosen, okay, we have this document, we know we don't need to update it for a couple months, we'll go ahead and throw that one through the conversion first. I would suggest that that is not the best idea. The best idea is really to choose something that has as many different kinds of examples in it as absolutely possible, because that is going to be the basis for your conversion and make all the future conversions of your future documents and help sets and other sets of output much easier. The way the conversion works is very, very specifically based on paragraph and character styles. So you want to make sure that every style is set up absolutely properly, and as much as it is a pain and it is irritating grunt work to sit and check and reapply those styles, again, it's going to make sure that your content comes out properly later. Even one character styled wrong, and it could be just something like an extra space thrown in that wasn't styled properly, something like that. It actually has the potential to throw off the conversion algorithm for that topic. Again, our conversion tool, we can write the conversion tool for a lot of rules, and it can be very intuitive, but when it comes down to it, the algorithm is amazing, but it doesn't know that you actually meant to have something styled as a heading 2 when it shows up as a heading 3. Whatever it shows up as in the conversion tool, when it hits the conversion tool, is what it's going to be spit out as.
Okay, thanks, Yehudit. So now we're going to move on to the style sheet development. And that's really when we're getting into the publishing. So the first part about the style sheet development is figuring out how you want to develop it, meaning identifying your detailed formatting requirements for each output format, whether you're doing PDFs or HTML. It's going to kind of help. More and more folks are asking about mobile, and that's becoming more and more of a requirement, something people should be thinking about. Dynamic publishing, dynamic web applications like knowledge bases, e-learning, whatever type of outputs you want to do or start with and move towards, you need to get some kind of detailed formatting requirements around them. And again, this is very important to coordinate with the information architect and the conversion team for the same reasons we spoke about before. The work that the style sheet people are doing needs to be working on content that you're converting, that your conversion team is converting, and you're going to want to make sure that there's a feedback loop between the style sheet team and the conversion team and the information architect, so they can be tweaking things as things going. Again, you don't want to get to the point where all the content's converted, and then you start working on the style sheets, and then you find out that it would have been really much more effective if you would have tagged something up a little bit differently. So it's really important to have people talking to each other and be on the same team. It's also very important to be prepared, and Yehudit's going to talk about this shortly. But having all the simple things, like if you have fonts that you're going to need to be using for your style sheets, so make sure they're available. We've had customers who everything's ready, things are ready to go, but there's no fonts. The fonts have to be purchased, or someone has to get them, or someone has to give an approval. Silly things like this just unnecessarily lengthen the process. So you want to be prepared with whatever fonts, good test data, okay, with a good comprehensive set of test data based on your information architecture and your tags that simulates each combination of tagging and structure. And it sounds silly, but in DITA, if you have a bulleted list inside of comes after a paragraph, after a note, inside of a table, right? So that's different than a bulleted list is going to look, that comes after a note, right after a heading. So all these different details, you really need to kind of invest the time of getting good test data that's going to simulate all these different structures, so you can really see what they're going to look like when you start doing the publishing. Now, it's also important that your test data will account for how it's going to look coming out of the CMS. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the different CMS tools, the different content management system tools, they often manage or deal with metadata and other aspects of your content, or maps, how your content is strung together to form publications. They often do it slightly different than other CMSs do it. So it's very important, definitely in the later stages, to make sure your test data is really accounting for the CMS you're going to be using. Okay, the developing of style sheets, it's a technical skill, but there's also, like everything else, there's best practices. For example, if you're using the DITA toolkit, which a lot of people are using to do your customizations for BDF or other formats, HTML. So there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. For example, we get people come to us with their style sheets that are broken, say, can you fix it? And we look at it and we say, well, how come your developer went and made all kinds of customizations right inside the code, inside the main body of the DITA code that we basically get, which basically means every time you want to upgrade the DITA, then you have to redo all of your specializations, all of your customizations. And that's the wrong way to do it. There's plugins, there's ways to do it the right way to make your style sheets maintainable over time. So you want to make sure your style sheets are built the right way, and again, have that good foundation for your house. Another thing to think about is localization of your style sheets to different languages based on style sheets that were already working well in English, or whatever your base language is going to be. Generally what happens is you want to have the style sheet developed and tested and working well, and then go through the additional effort of customizing those for the various languages. Some people come to me and say, oh, don't I need a different style sheet for each language? And the answer is absolutely not. The right way to do it is to get a style sheet and add the localization on top of the style sheet. For some languages, it could be a matter of half an hour just to get that localization done. Some style sheets, some languages, it takes a little bit longer. Some languages in Russian, etc. But the main idea is you want to make sure you're going to be using the same base style sheets, not getting into a trap of creating different style sheets for each language. Not unnecessary, and it just becomes very difficult to maintain. And the last bullet, I think, is very important, especially for those of us who are in documentation fields. Your style sheets are a product. They're a piece of software. Just like you document your own software and your own product, you want to document the style sheets for the people who are using them. And the people who are using them are you and your users, your writers, and your publication folks, and other people in your company. You're going to have style sheets which are going to have different parameters in there. For example, if you want to have a PDF coming in different page sizes, or different heading levels, or levels of talk, or index without an index, all kinds of different ways that you can parameterize your style sheets, and things called output classes that really kind of help drive very specific behaviors in style sheets. You want to document those and make sure that those are available to people who are using them.
One thing to really keep in mind is that as much work as you put into it, the job really is not finished until you can publish real content through your CMS if you're using a CMS. That is, you can look at a PDF, but you won't know that the PDF is really what the whole thing is going to look like until you see how it comes out with your tool set. And because of that, ideally, the best way it works for the style sheet beta testing is to make sure that you actually have some of your own converted content already in the CMS. That is, sometimes we can do some basic testing based on just regular best practices DITA, but if you have certain output classes set up that you want things to look in a certain way, or you have a specific way you've got content going, that's not going to show up until we get the converted content. And the CMS is for certain things that need to be decided on runtime. So it could be some of the metadata that's on the document page and what the front page looks like, or how the glossary is set up, something like that. And we're not going to see that until we get content from the CMS. With localization, like Joe mentioned, sometimes it can be, a very, very short period of time for us to work on the localization in terms of adding it to the style sheets. But you won't know that it's really working until you see it with your own converted content. So that's something to build into your project plan, to say, hey, I'm not going to need French until 6 months from now, but I want them to go ahead and build the style sheets for French now. You need to understand that you could get your French converted document in 6 months, and once you run it through the machine, you realize there are some things that need to be tweaked. So the best is if for every language that you're doing localization for, you have some converted content in that language to be able to test with. And as we talked about earlier, it's a process. So you want to leave some room in your budget for tweaking the style sheets. So as the certain things come through and you say, oh, we didn't know that we were going to start putting bulleted lists inside of a numbered list inside of a table cell, now we need to add that to the style sheets. You want to make sure that you have some budget available for that in the future. And the style sheets are very sensitive to the differences in tagging. So especially for PDF, if you set something up in a certain way, it's going to change if you start running it through a different kind of tagging. And page break rules can be a slight pain point for some people when it comes to this, because what happens is that you might say, I want a widow and orphan of 2 lines on a sublist, and then suddenly you find out that that's not working exactly the way you wanted, but you don't find that out for a while later. That's something else that might need to be tweaked later on. For configuring the metadata, that is something that needs to be configured between the CCMS, CMS, and your information architect and the style sheet developers. The metadata is what's going to show what not only the name of the document, but it can say whether it's the date gets decided on runtime or whether the author gets to decide what date it's being published, what the headers and footers look like, things like that. And that needs to be coordinated between all 3 of those. And then the style sheets are integrated with that, so that the style sheets show the footers where you want the footers and the headers where you want the headers, with the specific information that you need in there. Yeah, Joe, were you going to say something?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning those. And as we spoke about before, that the different content management tools, they often deal with metadata slightly differently, and you want to make sure that the metadata and the integrations are happening according to your information architecture and according to what those tools are, the best practices for configuring those tools. So yeah, so
you want to talk about configuring the workflow a little bit, Joe? Yeah.
So the workflow and the user management is generally done by the CMS people, and that's really not so contingent on the architecture or the conversion or the style sheet. So that's something that can be done by the vendor while you're working on everything else. And one of the main things to remember is not to sign off until you have real content uploaded and the publishing is all working properly on your real content. So as I mentioned before, I'm sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the CMS handles the metadata and the classification and the conditionalization differently. So that's something to keep in mind when you're configuring those tools and when you're dealing with the style sheets, particularly like we spoke about before. Go ahead, Yehudit, I'll let you take it over from here.
So you might think to yourself, how come Suite Solutions or whatever company you're working with doesn't just have a set of content that they can go ahead and run through, and how come I have to have all of this conversion stuff done, and how come we have to do all of this style sheet work, each one separately? And one of the big reasons for that is that every CMS handles the publishing tool chain differently. So some of them integrate with the DITA OT toolkit in one way and some of them in another way. There are different PDF rendering engines that can be used. So while some companies may choose to use Antenna House, another one may be using XCP or Topleaf, something like that. And all of these factors impact your information architecture, your style sheet, and even sometimes your document conversion. Because if your XML does not have the right code in it, it's not going to be picked up properly.
So moving on to deployment, after you've got the conversion and you've got content, and after you've got style sheets, and now you've got a CMS that's all configured and ready to go, now it's time to roll it out. So you want to install the tools and test them, either on premises or if you're using a hosted solution. You want to import your content, you want to validate the entire process, and then, like we spoke about before, you want to go ahead and train up your authoring team. What a lot of folks do is they train everybody up in the beginning, all their authors, and then by the time they're actually working on this, it may be a number of months down the road. And like everybody else, I know it's with me also, that you learn something 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months before, and then you need to use it in production, so it's not so effective. People need to brush it off, and to get kind of brush off their skills and to get training. So it's really a good idea to keep in mind and budget for training up your authoring team close to the time when you're actually going to be deploying and going live. You also want to develop a plan for migration, the migration of the rest of your content. Generally, what you'll do for the initial implementations, you'll take one set of content, maybe one book, or maybe one set of manuals, convert it, and test all the style sheets on that, all the publishing. But you're really later on going to want to go and migrate that content. So you really want to put together a plan for migrations, meaning stopping, work on that content, freezing it, converting it, checking it, fixing it up, importing it, publishing it, and testing it, all the things we were talking about before. And that's kind of what we were talking about before by the staged implementation. And the last thing that's very important is support. When you go into production, it's a good idea to keep in touch with your information architect and the people who have been helping you along the way. And we also often recommend for groups is to set up a formal authoring forum, like in Meet Weekly, and just a forum or a way that your authors can get together on a call and share different tagging situations they're coming across. They can ask questions to your go-to expert, whether it be someone on your team who's been trained up, who has a lot more experience than others, or your information architect consultant, whoever it is. But the idea to go and share situations and share experiences, ask questions, is very, very important. Discussing ideas for how to share the content, organize the content. As your content gets more of it becomes converted and migrated into your system, so more and more questions are going to come up. Now, how should we organize it? How are we going to share this? How can we reuse content? It's very important to keep that conversation open. Discussing ideas for updating the tagging model. We said before that information architecture is not always a one-stop exercise. It's an ongoing process, and that process is driven by work in the field. Just like everything else, as you work in the field, as you're writing, and you're creating new content, then you'll learn new ways to maybe update the content model, tagging model, and make it easier for others to work or make it more efficient. And again, it often goes back to the maintainability and the efficiency of your style sheets. The more consistent your authors are working together and tagging up your content, the more maintainable and less headache your style sheets are going to be later on. And from the tools point of view, you're always going to want a lot of time in budget to tweak the style sheets and the CMS tools. Again, as you get more content in, as you get people working up and running, new authors, new groups, you're going to want time and budget to go and tweak things. It's like any other big system, whether it's a house. When you get the house up and now you want to add an addition onto your house, or you want to repaint something, or you find out the furniture wasn't placed right the first time, you want to kind of move things around. It's very important to keep these things in mind and to budget for them and set expectations for your stakeholders that this is going to be something that's going to be expected over time. So before we end, I'd like to show you, we have a couple minutes left, I want to show you what a sample project plan can look like based on what we've been talking about. Okay, so what I've done here is I've put in all the aspects of the conversion or the migration that we've spoken about before, from the beginning that did a quick start all the way down to production. And what I'd like you to kind of to pay attention to is that if you make the Gantt chart, if you make the schedule right, it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be, a serial process. A lot of these parts of the migration or parts of your project can be done and should be done in parallel. A lot of these have dependencies like you're seeing on the screen now. And the idea is that one step drives the other. And as soon as you're possibly ready to start, one of the parallel steps, you can. Not too early, not too late. And part of this is, it's a juggling game a little bit. Part is juggling because you want to make sure you're not starting too early and you have all your prerequisites and you're prepared to start each step. On the other hand, you're juggling resources. Everyone has a J job to do. Not everyone has the luxury of having, full-time people working on these kind of data conversions or data implementations. So the idea of kind of looking forward, keeping to the schedule, making a schedule, be realistic with expectations about how long things are going to take, and making sure the resources are going to be available to answer questions to your consultants and your people who are developing the style sheets and the conversions, be able to test and check and retest and then improve, okay, and not hold up the process. So you can see here the way doing it the right way with the scheduling can either shorten the term quite a bit, but if you don't have the right people ready at the right times, and there's delays in getting comments back, it can really put a monkey wrench and really drive out a lot of other parts of the process. So I'd like to go back to the slide here, and thank you very much for joining us. I hope you got some value out of the presentation, and please feel free to be in touch with either Yehudit or myself. We'll be very happy to talk to you and hear any feedback and let us know how we can help you in any way. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.